Let's now create our ocean spectrum. So first of all, let's dive out of this node into our object context. Let's create a new geometry node. Let's call this ocean spectrum. Let's also turn off the visibility for the flat tank fluid for now. Let's now dive into our geometry node and create an ocean spectrum node. So remember, we will need an ocean evaluate and probably a grid to be able to visualize what's happening with my ocean spectrum. So connect the grid to the first input, the ocean spectrum to the second input, and click on the visibility flag for the ocean evaluate. Now let's bring the grid size higher. Let's start with 100 meters. And let's increase both rows and columns to 1000. Now, to have a sense of the scale of our scene, let's turn on the terrain. So let's go back to our object context, look for the terrain object, and turn on its display flag. Now let's go back to our ocean geometry. Let's turn on the display for the rest of our objects and probably make the grid slightly larger. Let's try with 140. Again, go to our camera view. And we can even go higher than 140. I'll go with 200. Now back to my ocean spectrum. Let's change the grid size to 100. Increase the resolution exponent to 9 for now. And now let's take a look at the wind parameter. So we may need to bring this down. I want a much calmer surface. This is looking good, but still I would like to decrease the speed a bit. Let's go with 1.5. And another thing I'd like to do is increase the choppiness just to have more sharper waves. So let's go with 1. We could even increase this value. Let's go with 1.4. And I think this would work. So for now, let's go with this. So what we will ultimately do is transfer the information from this ocean spectrum into our water surface. Okay, so now that we're happy with the surface, let's create a null just below our ocean spectrum. Let's call this out ocean spectrum. Let's change the color to black. I'm going to copy this null and go back to my flat tank fluid. Okay, so in here I will merge the ocean spectrum. So add an object merge node. And under the object1 property, press Ctrl V to paste the output of that null. So of course we won't see anything here. Remember, we need an ocean evaluate to transfer this information onto our geometry. So let's make some space here. Add our ocean evaluate and connect it under our particle surface. Now connect the object merge into the second input of the ocean evaluate. And we should now have the waves transferred into our water surface. Let's again increase the resolution of this surface. So go back to your surfacing, particle separation, and bring it to 1. Okay, so if we take a look at the wireframe, you will notice how we have some detail here, We will need more detail on the outer part of the geometry, but that can be easily fixed. So back on the surfacing tab, let's look for the adaptivity value, and let's bring this value down to 0 for now. And now we should be able to see much more detail on the mesh. Now let's take a look at the edges. Let me turn off the rest of the objects for a moment. So click on Hide Other Objects. And we may also want to increase the subdivisions here on the outer edge. So go to the Regions tab, scroll down, and under the Extrude Divisions, bring this value up to 200. Okay, so let's take a look through the camera. Let's change the view to Smooth Shaded. And this is looking much more interesting. Now all the detail that we have on our ocean spectrum is being reflected here on our surface. We might need to extend the extrude distance just a bit. Let's go with 30. And another thing that I want to do is check another frame, probably when we have the larger splash around frame 220, just to make sure that we have enough detail. So let's do that now. And here we go. So I think this is working quite nicely. So I think we can now move on to the whitewater.